Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Malice in the Mitten. I am your host, Tracy Preston, along with my bestie, Christine Mulligan. Hey, Christine.
Hey, Trace. Hey, everybody. Thanks for coming back again. All right, Trace, what are we getting into today? What are you going to be telling me about?
All right, well, I personally feel like this is, how do I say it? This is the most horrific story we've ever talked about yet. Welcome, everyone. This is Season 2, Episode 8, Rose Larner. Now, I want to place a warning on this episode. I will be describing in detail the horror of what happened to Rose. Rose's mother allowed the Lansing State Journal to print exactly what happened to her as she felt it was important. And therefore, I will be doing the same. So, here we go. Today's story is of an 18-year-old woman named Rose Larner. Rose was a tough, street-smart girl who had a hairpin trigger temper. She was fierce, had a sharp tongue, and she was never intimidated by anyone, be it man or woman. Her mother said, quote, "She could be a headache and a half. If she were kidnapped for ransom, the kidnappers would pay me to take her back."
My mother always said that about me, too. I honestly feel like I've heard a lot of mothers say that about their daughters. You set it up, but you haven't gotten into it. So I'm just going to say right off the bat, I'm a little bit nervous how bad this is going to be. Let's get into it.
All right, here we go. So Rose was always hanging out with her friends until the wee hours of the morning. And because she got very late hours, her family nicknamed her Vampire. She had no problem walking around the streets of Lansing at night, either by herself or with her friends. I would be scared as hell to do that, to be honest, but Rose wasn't.
Why? Is it a rough neighborhood in Lansing?
Well, I mean, it's downtown Lansing, right? It's the capital of Michigan, and I don't know what it was like back in the early 90s, but still, at night, late night, I'm talking wee hours, 1, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning.
So it's got all the trappings of a regular American inner city. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Okay. All right. I hear you.
All right. Even though Rose was a rough and tough girl who had no problem scrapping if someone looked at her sideways, she had a big heart. She loved her family, loved children, loved the elderly, and whenever her mother needed help with something like setting the table for dinner, she was always the first one to jump in and help. Rose also had a soft spot for the homeless. If she saw a homeless person, she would stop and give them money. Rose attended church twice a week. She had her own Bible and knew her verses. When she was in school, she had excellent grades. She had a desire to become a police officer, just like her uncle. Rose was diagnosed with hyperactivity and was constantly on the move. The only time she stood still when she showered, which she did that twice a day, when she was sleeping and talking on the phone. Speaking of talking on the phone, Rose was a marathon talker. Legit. There was a phone bill seen when I was doing my research for the show. This girl would make over, are you ready for this? Over 1,000 calls a month. She truly had a bunch to say to everyone. This girl had the gift of gab.
I kind of feel like that's every teenage girl that I've ever known. I mean, nowadays, they're not talking, they're texting, but they're texting to 10 people at a time continuously. With every minute that passes, another 10 people. Maybe that's a little exaggeration, but you know what I mean? So far, she's shaping up to sound like a regular teenage girl, and I still feel a little bit nervous about where you're going to take this.
I know. I'm nervous in preparation to say what I'm going to say. So I'm going to set it all up, though. The one thing Rose loved more than anything was the holidays, especially Easter and Christmas. These holidays brought out the little girl in her. When Rose was about 8 years old, she and her brothers were throwing stones at a group of boys close to their home that they didn't know. But after the rock fight, they chatted with the boys, and one of them was named Billy Brown. From this moment on, Rose and Bill were thick as thieves. They both were crushing on each other as they grew up over the years, and at one point, as little kids, Rose and her girlfriend had pinned Billy down and gave him his first kiss. But that's about as intimate as they ever became. At the end of the day, they were just good friends. As I mentioned, Rose was a feisty one, and she didn't care who you were. If she felt it, she would get right in your face and give you the business. Per an article in the Lansing State Journal, when Rose was 15 years old, her mother was away for the weekend. So what do you do when your parents are away and you have the house to yourself? You throw a freaking party. There was a girl there that Rose didn't really know, and I don't know why, but Rose was triggered, and before the girl knew what was happening, Rose was threatening her with a fork. As a result of this incident, Rose's mother decided it was time for her daughter to get some counseling. With a determined mother spirit, her mother took her to Rivendell Psychiatric Hospital in St. John's, Michigan. While at the hospital ward with her mother, Rose said, quote, "Mom, this is a loony bin." Her mom laughed at her, but said it was up to her if she wanted to be admitted. Ultimately, Rose made the decision to admit herself. While there for a couple of months, Rose made good friends with some of the kids there, especially a boy named Brody. She fell for him hard. She had even taken an eraser to, quote, burn the letter B in her upper thigh. Christine, do you remember that sissy test in like middle school? You know, where you would take an eraser and basically erase all your skin layers until you couldn't take it anymore? Did you guys ever do that?
There was kind of a version like that in multiple different ways, like the Indian burn or the eraser burn or the twisting of the fingers and stuff, you know, any kind of inflicted pain. So yes, I do remember that. And even I do remember some people like branding themselves, like you were starting to get into, and that was a thing too. I myself never did it. And when my brothers tried to Indian burn me, I retaliated quickly. So, yeah, I remember them.
Yeah. So that's basically what she did to scar her leg with the letter B. And I had to do that sissy test, and I had a scar for the longest time on my hand. It was just a straight line. But that son of a bitch hurt really bad.
Well, Tracy, thank you for sharing. That's a lot that you went through.
It was.
Because you just basically admitted to the fact that you did it incessantly until you've gotten so deep.
No, I had to, because listen, we were in class and Dee Dee Barrett said, "Oh, you want to do the sissy test?" I'm like, "Yeah, dude, I can handle it." And I was like, "Oh boy, that hurt really bad."
But look how far you went to prove somebody wrong.
I know, it's an issue.
You have that little sinister side.
Well,
I'll show you.
That's exactly right. I'm no chicken. I got it.
That's your little sinister side coming out.
Yeah, it's there for sure. All right. Anyway, when it was time for her to be discharged, leaving the hospital was much harder than she imagined. She would never see these friends again, and she actually liked it there, and she felt safe. Rose attended Everett High School, but with all the issues she was having at school, she let her mother enroll her in Sexton High School. She was hoping that this would be a fresh start, but she missed her friends at Everett High School, especially her oldest and closest friend, Billy Brown. She didn't stay at Sexton long, and soon she was back at Everett High School. Rose also enjoyed playing basketball with her close girlfriend. One day, they were playing basketball when Rose noticed a man. She had never seen him before, and he was approaching the court. Before long, Rose had made a new friend and just stopped playing basketball to give this guy all of her attention. Her friend got tired of waiting for Rose to get back to playing hoops and just left for home. A short while later, Rose showed up at her friend's house and told her that the man she was talking to raped her. Together, they immediately contacted the police. She was taken to the hospital, and a rape kit and blood were taken. By the age of 16, Rose had dropped out of high school, and soon she had enrolled at Harry Hell Center and Technology. But within a month, she had quit that as well. And I'm thinking that she knew she needed to complete her education in order to attain her goal of becoming a police officer, and that's exactly what she did. In 1993, Rose completed her education and completed her GED. Now, Rose's mother, she was a single mother taking care of 3 kids. She was working 2 jobs to support her 3 children. She was a painter by trade, which she did during the day. At night, she worked at Quality Dairy, which us Michiganders affectionately call QD. They have amazing donuts and coffee and everything that a convenience store has, and it has been around since I was just a little girl. Now, because her mother was constantly working, Rose and her 2 brothers were getting pagers so that they could check in with their mother, whose name was also Rose. So that's why I will continue to just refer to her as Rose's mother. Otherwise, we would all get too confused. especially me. It was the summer of 1993 where Rose met a local rapper named John Ortiz Kehoe. The two of them clicked, and before long, they were dating. Rose's brother said, quote, she was really into him. She talked about him like he was a god. She wanted to do anything he wanted to do. She talked about wanting to be like him. She wanted to rap like him. Her other brother, Jamie, said, quote, everything always centered around the Browns. I didn't like any direction she was heading. She didn't want to listen.
She sounds like a typical boy crazy teenage girl where they just want to be loved by a teenage boy. She sounds a little boy crazy.
Yeah, for sure. In the fall of 1993, Rose was denied acceptance into the Army due to her stay at the psychiatric hospital in Rivendell, and also because of the bee she had burned into her skin also made her an undesirable candidate. Here's a little background on that. My husband Todd was in the Marines. He was an expert rifleman. If he didn't have the tattoos he had, he would have been in sniper school. It's because of the tattoos he had that disqualified him, because if you were captured, they could identify who you were. And that's a problem. When Rose received this news, her heart completely broke. She cried and cried for a couple of days, but then she stood tall and put that on the shelf and moved on. While all of this was going on, Kehoe was in the midst of making his rap album. He was a little bit of a big deal with his music in Lansing. Rose was completely smitten with this guy and asked her mother if Kehoe could move in with them. And her mother actually allowed it, and Kehoe moved into the family home. Initially, Rose's mother thought Kehoe was a nice enough guy, but one day she had found quite a large amount of money sitting out in plain sight, and she also found out that he had weapons as well. And that right there was a no-go. The invitation of staying under her roof was revoked. She told Rose that Kehoe had to pack it up and get out.
So we're thinking drugs?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yep. He was dealing a little bit of drugs with that old little friend of Rose's, Billy Brown. Yep.
That sounds like a trap.
That was basically the end of the relationship between Rose and Kehoe. He moved out and they broke up. Kehoe moved on and was ignoring Rose at this point. He started seeing other women, and this was tearing Rose apart. She was so in love with this guy, and he just dropped her. She was doing everything she could do to contact him, but he continued to ignore her and her barrage of calls. Rose was enraged and was not about to be ignored. She was not going to stop. And this went on for months. It's now the end of November, early December of 1993. Kehoe had taken a date to a party in East Lansing at a house on campus of MSU, which is Michigan State University, called the Monty House. Billy Brown, this is her old school friend, remember, since they were 8 years old. He was also there with Kehoe and his date. Rose had been following Kehoe. She had basically become his very own personal stalker. She followed them into the party and had gotten in quite an argument with Kehoe in front of everyone. Rose really let him have it, and she didn't care who was watching or listening. And after giving him a public verbal smackdown, she stormed out of the party, got into her van, fired it up, and rammed Kehoe's pickup truck. This girl was crazy. Tough.
Yeah, losing it.
Yeah, she wasn't taking anybody's shit. Billy left the party with Rose to make sure that she made it home safely. Rose had a job working at Meijer in the pizzeria on site. Now again, for those of you who don't live in Michigan, think of Meijer kind of like a Target. They have just about everything you could buy. Food, shoes, clothes, electronics, you name it. It's a one-stop shop. It's now December 6, 1993. Rose left work and arrived home close to midnight. Her brother was sleeping on the couch, and he was awakened when he heard his sister on the phone as her voice was raised and in an argument. Before long, Rose was dressed for the cold night, told her brother she loved him, and headed out of the door. She walked to the QD to see her mother. It was close to 1:30 in the morning. She wanted to check in and let her mother know that she was heading out with her friends. Rose's mother had a bad feeling. Call it mother's intuition. She told Rose to take her van to go out, but Rose said, "Nope, I'm good with walking." Said her usual "I love you," and left the convenience store. It was finally the end of her mother's shift at QD, and when she arrived home, she immediately walked into Rose's room, but her bed had not been slept in. Exhausted, but full of worry, her mother couldn't sleep. She just couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. It's now Monday morning. Rose is still not home. So her mother contacted the police and spoke with Detective John Cawdy. Thankfully, he didn't give her the usual rigmarole of, she's an adult and wait for the usual amount of days until her daughter could be reported as missing. Detective Cawdy said, quote, "Something was terribly wrong. Mothers know. And my gut told me something." Rose's mother went back to QD to see if anyone had seen Rose. Well, they hadn't. Her mother said Rose never came home and to reach out if they had seen her pop in the store. When she returned home, Rose was not there in her usual place on the phone. With Rose and her phone addiction, her mother was growing even more concerned. Her mother looked around for any sign that Rose had been home, but there were no signs. Her mother called her ex-husband and let him in on what was going on. She called all of Rose's friends, but none of them had seen her or heard from her either. Next, she called Billy Brown, but he was nowhere to be found either. All of Rose's friends tried to console her and told her that Rose is probably with Billy. Next, her mother called the Meyer Pizzeria, but found that she was still a no-call, no-show. Rose never missed work. 6 days had passed and still no Rose. Her mother called Meyer again to see if Rose had picked up her check. When they told her she had not, this is when the missing person search kicked into full throttle. She made and posted a missing person flyer and was putting them everywhere. And this is when her mother said, quote, "As soon as I saw her picture on that poster, I knew we'd never see her again." It's now December 20th, 1993. The Lansing police were receiving a lot of tips, and they followed every lead. They were digging up people's basements, draining gravel pits, diving in rivers, searching people's backyards. But no Rose. The police even utilized cadaver dogs as they were boating up and down the river, but still nothing. Rose's mother had placed a light in her front window and would keep it burning until Rose came home. Detective Cawdy paid a visit to Billy Brown's home. When questioning his mom of his whereabouts, she stated that he was with John Ortiz Kehoe. Detective Cawdy had also collected dental records for Rose so he could have those when and if they were able to recover her body. With Christmas just around the corner, Rose's mother knew that if Rose was alive, she would be home. Christmas was her favorite holiday, and there would be no way she would miss putting up the tree and decorating it with her family.
Oh my goodness. So they never find Billy or her so far. But what about John Kehoe? Like, where was he? Was he missing too?
Kind of at this point, yeah.
Okay. All right. All right. I don't want to get ahead. So go ahead.
Okay, so as the tips kept coming in, there were a large number of people calling and saying the same two names, Billy Brown and John Kehoe. Every time Detective Cawdy spoke with Billy, he kept saying the same thing. He didn't know where she was, but Cawdy's gut told him that Billy was involved somehow. Rose's mother started going through Rose's room, hoping to find something. Anything that would help. In Rose's Bible, she found a piece of paper that was written by Rose. It was a prayer request for none other than John Kehoe, and it read, quote, "Deliver him from sin, evil, and drugs." She reported this to Detective Cawdy. Christmas came and went. It's now spring of 1994. Still nothing. Detective Cawdy was obsessed with searching for Rose. The word out on the streets of southern Lansing was that, quote, Cawdy will never find the body. He had even heard from Billy that John made a rap song up about him. Quote, "Cawdy was naughty," and it went on to talk about blood and body parts. Then another year had passed. It's now spring of 1995. After 26 years of service, though, Cawdy would retire. It's now August of 1995, and two new detectives, Lucius Hayward and John Hersman, were now heading up Rose's investigation. They had hit a couple of dead ends when Detective Donald Brooks of the Michigan State Police got a hit from a tipster. Brooks was now helping the Lansing State Police to form a task force, and by late 1995, he was leading the investigation. Detective Brooks and the task force had to start from the very beginning all the way back to December 7th, 1993. As luck would have it, Detective Brooks came across the man who picked up Billy and John at a bus station, and he had a little story to tell. Brooks said, quote, "The details were significant and very consistent with what we have now learned. This was a big break." The man mentioned something to the effect that a girl, was killed in a house. By this time, the consistent police presence was getting to Billy. It was in April 1996, and Billy finally broke from his story and wanted to talk. What he had to say was about to blow everything wide open. Billy told Detective Brooks that he didn't kill Rose. The person who did was his friend and drug-dealing friend Kehoe. Billy turned himself in, but Kehoe could not be found. Now that the police knew that the murder had happened at Kehoe's grandparents' home in Albion, a search warrant was obtained, and off to Albion they went. Per the Forensic Files documentary called Out of the Ashes, quote, while searching the home, crime scene experts had sprayed luminol all over inside of a bathroom, but nothing showed up. Now remember, this is 2 years later, right? So that makes sense to me. They sprayed outside of the bathroom's carpeted hallway, and there it was. They saw a circular shape that to them looked like it was an outline of the bottom of a bucket. But after 2 years since Rose went missing, there just wasn't any DNA to get from this piece of carpet. But just above the ring on the floor, they noticed something that looked like a drop of blood on the wallpaper. Now, the wallpaper had a pattern on it, but there it was, a single drop of blood. When the spot on the wallpaper was treated, the Q-tip turned pink, which indicated this spot was definitely blood. And as luck would finally have it, there was enough to run a DNA test. But where would they find what they needed to compare it to the Rose's DNA? Well, remember earlier in the story when I told you that Rose had been raped? The evidence room at the police station still had it, and when compared to the spot of blood on the wallpaper, it was a definitive match. Now they can prove it was Rose's blood in the home of Kehoe's grandparents. Thank God.
But you know what I didn't realize? Billy, they knew where he was, but he just had a story that he didn't see her, or we don't really know what his story was. Because you said that he changed his story. So that means they knew where he was all that time, but he had a story that was different from what they were trying to say to him.
Yeah. So basically, I think it's coming. I don't want to spoil it. They were okay. Like, no.
Don't get ahead.
Okay.
Don't get ahead. Go ahead. Keep going.
Okay. So while all this was going on, the detectives were keeping an eye on Tim Kehoe, which was John's brother. It was unbeknownst to Tim, but he led the detectives to Mexico and his brother. With a DNA match to Rose and Billy Brown's confession, they were ready to arrest John. They found him bellied up and drinking a beer at the bar. Within minutes, they had him. Quote, it was like slam, bam, and he was out of there right now. I don't think he even knew what happened, said Brooks. It all made sense. Billy didn't have the motive to kill Rose, but Kehoe sure did. He is the one who used to date her. He is the one that was getting hounded by Rose nonstop. She embarrassed him at the party at MSU. Like he was this, this big local rap star, right? Because MSU is a college town. It's a big party. It's a frat house. It's now that I'm going to reveal what this little bastard did to her. And these details are extremely gruesome and heartbreaking. So take a deep breath because the details are unlike anything I've ever heard. This is the confession of Billy Brown. The night of Rose's murder started out with her heading out late at night on December 7th, 1993, which was her usual MO. As she left the house, she told her brother she loved him and walked out of the house for the last time. Her mother was working late shift at Quality Dairy when Rose popped in to let her mother know what her plans were for the night. She left the store and waved goodbye. It wasn't long before she ran into her childhood friend Billy Brown. She hopped in his car and pushed Billy to page Kehoe. Remember pagers? That was kind of the big thing back then, in the early 90s.
Yeah.
Yep. So Rose wanted Kehoe to meet up with them. Kehoe told Billy that the only way he would hang out with them was if Rose promised to have sex with the two men. Rose agreed because she would do anything to be with Kehoe once again.
Why are girls like that? Why are there girls in this world that will compromise themselves to such an extent to please someone else? If you have to go that far outside of your comfort box, comfort zone, anywhere, anytime, anywhere, that person that is asking you to do that is not a good person for you to be around. Period. I'm sorry.
Exactly.
Please. Don't know why girls do this. I mean, I'm sure there are guys that do this too. I don't know why anyone would sacrifice themselves. I feel like we should all be very selfish. Know who you are, know what you want, and know that it starts and ends with you.
Yeah, hold your standards up high. Screw you.
Yeah. All right, so let's hear this. Yes.
All right. So once they were all together in Kehoe's mother's car, he drove the three of them out on a country road and pulled over for the threesome Rose promised. But when it came down to it, Rose didn't want to have sex with anyone except Kehoe. And that's exactly what happened. Now, the logistics of this tryst is really weird to me. While Kehoe was having sex with Rose, her head was laying on Billy's lap. When they finished, they were back on the road heading towards Albion for a night of partying at Kehoe's grandparents' home as they were spending the winter in a warmer climate. Remember, this is early December. On their way, Kehoe pulled into a Meijer, told Rose and Billy he would be right back. He had to pick up some, quote, things for the night's festivities. Now, if you're wondering what was in the bag, I'll tell you. He had purchased a hatchet, charcoal lighter fluid, and a fillet knife. 30 minutes later, Kehoe was back in the car and back on track to his grandparents' home. Once there, the partying began with marijuana and cocaine. Rose and Kehoe engaged in sex yet again. Then the three of them all hopped into the shower together. Kehoe was pushing Rose to have sex with both Billy and him in the shower, but Rose wasn't into it. Once out of the shower, Rose and Billy were standing in front of the bathroom mirror. Rose was brushing her hair when Kehoe came up behind her and put a cord around her neck. Rose just thought it was a joke and was even laughing as she said, quote, "Quit it, John, quit playing." But Kehoe wasn't playing. He strangled her to death right in front of Billy. She still had her hairbrush in her hand, lying dead on the floor. Billy said, quote, "This isn't the first time you've done this." Kehoe replied, quote, "What do you think?" Billy then immediately turned and vomited in the sink.
Oh my goodness. Okay, so this is Billy's confession, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so are we going to get to a Kehoe confession?
Oh, of course not. He's innocent, don't you know?
Oh.
Yeah, he's one of those.
Oh. So he's rich?
I don't know. I don't think so. I never saw anything about that. He's just a narcissist, Christine. Now remember, Kehoe was drug dealing in Michigan all over the place. Running with the tough crowd, that kind of thing. So he's got to step it up, so to speak.
Oh, so are we saying he's connected in some way?
I don't know who he's connected to. I just know he dealt a lot of drugs to a lot of people.
Okay. All right.
So Kehoe, donned only in his boxer shorts, dragged Rose into the shower. With a newly purchased fillet knife, he then slit Rose's neck, turned on the shower, and drained her of her blood. While Billy was standing in the bathroom, he could hear Kehoe cutting and hitting her with the hatchet. In Billy's confession, he said, quote, "He started to take off her arms, feet, and hands. Her head, too. He came back with a foot sticking on a knife. He held it up like Clash of the Titans before he took it to the basement," end quote. There was a fireplace in the basement of his grandparents' home, and this is where Kehoe threw Rose's body parts that he had just dismembered. He started a fire, burning everything until only ash remained. Billy said, quote, "You could still see the shape of the skull, but most of it was ashes." At this point, the boys heard the doorbell. It was a friend of Kehoe's and his girlfriend. The couple hung out and partied with Billy and Kehoe for a while before they left. Unbeknownst to them, the horrors that had just occurred, and that the torso of Rose was still lying in the shower stall. After the couple left, Billy said, quote, "We cleaned the house up, put the body in a trash can, grabbed some shovels, 10 gallons of gasoline, some trash bags, and we left." With their supplies and what remained of Rose were loaded in Kehoe's mother's car, they headed north to Billy's family's property on Island Lake in Meredith. Billy said, quote, "It's far away and secluded. We were going to burn her up until there was nothing left. No body, no crime." The two of them dug a hole, placed a bunch of logs in the hole. Then on top of it, they placed Rose's torso. They poured gasoline all over her and lit her on fire. They burned her body for 10 hours. While Rose's remains were burning, Billy said Kehoe took some of Rose's cooked flesh from the fire. Quote, "He put it on a piece of bread with some mustard and ate it just for the experience. just to know.
This guy was a sicko.
I've never heard of such a thing.
Well, I mean, you have heard of such a thing, technically, because the other guy was cannibal, too. The other serial killer that's infamous, which makes me sick that all these guys are famous.
Dahmer?
But,
is that who you're talking about?
Yeah.
True. Like, that's true.
He used to cook them and eat them.
Yeah,
like,
that's right.
For a week, apparently. He had parts in his fridge and freezer.
He sure did. All of it wrapped up.
At least in that one show or movie that they had about him, like he would take them out and like prepare them like a meal, like you would if you had chicken in the freezer.
Yeah.
It's gross. You've heard of it. You're shocked to hear of it this time too, because it never gets not shocking.
So once the fire had burned down to nothing but ash and cooled, the pair had shoveled the ashes into garbage bags and headed to Big Rapids, where Kehoe's brother lived. On their drive away from the property, they would hang the bags out of the car, getting rid of Rose's ashes as they drove. Billy said, quote, "We spread the ashes along the roadside and highways all the way to Big Rapids." Now, I'm guessing this is hours worth of driving that they spread her ashes, because they were like up north. I don't know exactly where Meredith is, but it sounds like it's kind of up there. So when they arrived at Tim's place, Kehoe's brother, you can imagine how they looked, right? They had been up a couple of days at this point. They were filthy from the horrific deeds they committed. Tim asked them, quote, "What did you do with her? What happened?" Well, his brother Kehoe just smiled, and his brother said, quote, "Never mind. I don't want to know." When Tim had seen the supplies of gas, hatchet, and shovels in the car, Kehoe said, quote, "Don't worry about that stuff in the car. I'll take care of it." It was now that the threesome came up with what kind of alibi they would give should they have to deal with the police. During the trial, Billy had laid out all of the gruesome details and pointed to his friend Kehoe when asked to identify him. Kehoe was found guilty and was sentenced to life of imprisonment at the Thumb Correctional Facility without the possibility of parole. When the verdict was read aloud, that piece of shit had the audacity to laugh. Now, I watched this because this was on Forensic Files and they had video, and it enraged me.
Okay, but so here's another one where evil is just evil and evil begets evil and all of that noise. The fact that kind of sends chills down my spine is that he went to his brother's place, his brother Tim, and Tim was almost like, "I know what you did. Oh my God, forget it. I don't want to know." Because he does it too. Like, there's a lot of question marks with that nonchalant, forget it, I don't even want to know kind of thing. There's some psychosis, and those little tiny breadcrumb clues you gave about Tim lead question marks all over the place about Kehoe's past.
Yeah, what went on in their home, yo?
Yeah.
Yeah. And you want to know a little something else? Guess who else is in Thumb Correctional Facility, Christine?
Oh, well.
Christopher Dankovich.
Really?
Yep. Yes, indeed. Interesting, right?
Interesting. Mm. Well, it is a whole correctional facility, so I'm assuming they have quite a few fuckers like these guys.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm.
Yeah.
And that is even the sadder reality of it all, is that on any given podcast we do, we are always dumbfounded in one way or another about the people that we're talking about. And then we reference the bigger people that are even more mind-baffling and boggling, like, Dahmer and all of those. So we're talking about like a lower level serial killers or lower level cannibals, and we're not as shocked, but we're still shocked each and every time. But then when you back up from that, the shock factor there's so many of them.
Yeah.
They're like, if it was a pie graph and it had the radius in the middle, and that's the Dahmers of them all, and you go outward, like the shock factor in the realization that there's so many of these people. Mm-hmm. I know this sounds completely kooky of me because I'm a kook, but it makes me realize how much more love we have to spread to make the good side a little bit bigger. Yeah. It's crazy bananas, right?
It's crazy bananas. It really is. It really is. I want to tell you a little something more. So while I was doing my research, there were a few links in some of the documents I was reading. One of those links took me to a Facebook page for this piece of shit Kehoe. Now, do you want to know who mans this Facebook page? Because initially I'm like, whoa, how can this guy have a Facebook page? Because they don't have access to the internet. You ready? Because this is going to light your ass on fire. His fiance.
Yeah, well, I'm sorry that doesn't have the effect that you think it was going to have. But you got to remember, my brother, what us New Yorkers like to say a lot of the time, he was upstate at college for a long time.
Oh, he was away at college?
Yeah, that's what we say. He was upstate at college. He was away at college for a long time. He was up at school. That was the story that you gave when you didn't have a family member that, that wasn't around for everything because they were up at college. It grew to be a funny way to say that he's in prison. He's also been married for 20 years, and he's only been released on parole for one. So, like I said, that's not as shocking to me because that's the crazy thing. And that's another reason why I was kind of saying prisoners have a way of reaching out and still living a life. And that kind of boggles my mind. He had a fiance that he keeps in touch with, and that she has a close, intimate relationship with him and doesn't want to believe his evils because she's being told and she's feeling what he's allowing her to know and feel.
Right. But here's the thing. He didn't have a fiance when he went to prison. Okay. So
she knew him before he went to prison?
I don't know, but he was not engaged when he went to prison. He was in freaking Mexico.
Yeah, so he met her through prison channel.
Right.
Like a friend of a friend had a girl that wanted to speak with somebody, or a friend of a friend came to visit one of their other friends and saw him in the waiting room, or saw him through the fence, or, there's a million different ways.
Right.
And they go and they visit them, and they get to know them, and they court them through telephone calls, which, by the way, the person on the outside is the one paying for those telephone calls. So that's a whole nother psychotic rabbit hole you want to go down, the psyche of those people.
And you know what I'm looking forward to? I'm looking forward to us doing round robin on this freaking show next season, because I really want to dive into the psyche of that, because that's bananas to me. It's batshit crazy.
It is bananas.
Yeah.
We kind of derailed off of the whole story that you just told.
He has a Facebook page. His fiance is manning the Facebook page because he's innocent. But he does also have a podcast, and he's also podcasting on my podcast hosting site, which is Podbean. And it's called The Making of a Cannibal. And there's like 7, 9 episodes. I listened to about half of them because I really wanted to hear what he had to say. So, like, at the end of it, I never hear a female's name. It's by a bunch of guys, so I don't know if they're I don't know who these friends are, but it's got like this rappy type. It's just the music. It's just music, and it's digitized voices. And basically he's saying his whole stance on this thing is it wasn't him. It was Billy Brown. And I'm trying to think, okay, could he have been framed? But it's like, who had the motive? It wasn't Billy Brown at all. I was trying to be very objective, right? Really listen to it. And then about like 3/4 of the way through each episode that I listened to, it's a recording of him calling whomever it is. I don't know who it is, but it's the typical, this is a collect call from Thumb Correctional Facility, do you accept the charges? They accept the charges, and then he goes on his little rant, right? So he takes you all the way from kind of like the beginning of the trial to the end of the trial.
Billy's in prison too, though, right?
Well, this is the crazy bit. So with everything that Billy did, he got 1 year in prison.
What?
1 year in prison. That's all this cat got. And then he was on parole. I couldn't find out how long he was on parole. I don't know. I'm going to guess. Maybe 3 years, maybe 4 years.
So here's my question, because I was kind of like thinking this while you were going through some of it. And Billy's confession is like what you went through and everything, right? Mm-hmm. So Billy pins everything on Kehoe. And Kehoe is crazy enough where I guess it folds out that way. But Billy paints himself as an innocent bystander somehow, even though he cops to also raping her, by the way.
No. No, Billy didn't have sex with her. She didn't want to have sex with him at all. Now remember, they were friends since they were little. They had this attraction, but nothing ever went anywhere. He was down for the sex. He was down to have the threesome, but he never pushed it. She was always saying no, and he backed off. But he was at the ready. I mean, he's a guy. He's a young guy. Of course he's at the ready.
This is what I'm saying. It begs to question, was Billy kind of coerced into hanging out with Kehoe in the first place? Was Billy a hard ass too, or was he like a punk bitch? And I use those terminologies just because that was appropriate for back in the early 90s. You know what I mean? How people used to intimidate other people into doing things.
The thing that just makes me so ill is that this kid Billy knew her since she was an 8-year-old girl. They were friends all the way through it. Like, he never even tried to stop. Now, granted, they were high on coke and this and that, and maybe he was just out of his mind, but he didn't do anything to stop it. And then he's listening and seeing body parts. He's listening to the hacking and the whacking at this girl, seeing the body parts, throwing the body parts in the thing. I mean, like...
Right. That's kind of where my mind's going, is that both Billy and Rose were oddly attracted to Kehoe in the way of needing to please him and wanting to be around him. Like, he had some kind of hold over them. Why is Kehoe in prison for raping and killing her and burning her and spreading ashes when Billy actually did all of those things? Okay, even if you want to take out the rape part, he was game for it. And then he spread her ashes, and he was a dirty mess. So he did all the things. So for him to get a fraction of the time.
He didn't even get a fraction, Christine. What the hell? A year?
Yeah.
1 year. And
yeah, that's insane.
So anyway, that is today's story, and I'm spent. So, all right, we're gonna wrap this up. Thank you so much for joining us for another great episode of Malice in the Mitten. Come back on Wednesday for Round Robin.
See you guys then. Bye.
Bye.